season to call for calmness on the African continent and peace and security to return to numerous war-torn countries across the continent. But Africa is not alone in the struggle across the globe, from the crisis in the Middle East and the fractured peace in parts of Africa. Humanity faces an existential question: is the dream of global peace and unity an unattainable dream, ideal, or do we lack the courage and commitment to turn that dream into reality? Today, as we gather to discuss global conflicts, what prospects for peace and unity in the course of today's edition of the program, let's confront the uncomfortable truths that fuel discord, be it on the African continent or elsewhere. Let us examine the glimmers of hope that prove that peace is not only possible but essential for the survival of this interconnected globe. Together, let's seek aspirations of the billions longing for a better tomorrow on the African continent and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point. Stay with us. In the wake of a plethora of challenges facing the African continent, today we shall be discussing global conflicts. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to today's edition of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa. Like I mentioned now, preamble, today we're discussing global conflicts, conflicts on the African continent, conflicts at the global stage, conflicts that have displaced millions, billions of people even, and of course led to a humanitarian crisis in different parts of the world. Meanwhile, today our question lies: is there room for peace and unity amidst, this plethora of challenges that are facing the globe? And of course, to discuss this day, first of all, I welcome Dr. Eddie Eric, a global politics consultant and executive secretary of Committee for Actions of Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you immensely, sir, for joining us this day.
Sharon, one more time, thank you for having us, for the invitation. I want to seize this opportunity very quickly before we forget to wish all of the listeners a happy end of the year 2024, for people to be very careful. And of course, we're wishing them a very new year 2025, which is just, a few days away. And I also want to send greetings to my co-panelists of the day, my dear brother STANLEY FONGOD. Doctor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eddie, for always honoring our invitation. Meanwhile, like you stated, your co-panelist is Dr. STANLEY FONGOD, who is joining us in his capacity as a Pan-Africanist, economist, and a fintech expert. Thank you, immensely, sir, for joining us this day.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me, and we'll also echo the sentiments of Dr. Eddie. I truly appreciate being with you on this platform, and your deep sense of understanding, especially in the political arena. It's absolutely unmatched. And to everyone else who is out there who has been, supporting us as well, and being able to follow and support what you do, Sharon, that's remarkable. We wish them to those Merry Christmas, and to those who are Christians, and Happy New Year to each and every one of us.
Thank you, sir, for joining us. Just to reiterate that Talking Point is streaming live on numerous platforms, and of course you're watching us on 4U Media Africa, and of course listening to us over the airways of FM 96.3. To debut today's conversational kickstart with you, Dr. Eddie Eric. Now, in your capacity as a global politics expert, now let's try to comprehend, some of the dynamics around this issue of global conflicts, given it is not just an issue pertinent to the African continent. It's something that we could relate to other parts of the globe. We've seen tensions in the Middle East, we've seen tensions in other parts of the African continent especially. And how can the globe foster for genuine peace in the wake of all these all these reasons, all these inequalities that are fueling discords at a global level?
Well, Sharon, thank you very much. The situation is very dire for many reasons. Reasons number one is statistics show that today less than 50% of the population of the world live in what we can call a democracy. And when I say democracy here, I want to name societies where you have equality, where you have a fairness, where you have a justice, where you have a clear respect for human rights. Those values, of course, are declining more and more. And one of the results or one of the outcome of this steady decline, is the number of conflict that we see all over the world. You are very right in saying that it is not just in Africa, the continent which has been known for its conflicts or any kind of a crisis that you may have, a famine, a disaster, diseases, or all that. But those crises are all over the place. Our world in data, for instance, the name about the 176 conflicts, by the end of 2023 and 2024, that include, either one-sided, violence, intrastate violence, or interstate violence, which are less nowadays. We see more and more conflict, within different countries. When we sum and then put all of these things together, the situation is calling for a great attention, but at the same time, there is the ambivalent, thinking about whether, with all this effort that we see, we are heading towards a world, a more peaceful world where guns will be truly silenced, as the African Union, announced one time, or are we just moving toward mere talks, multiplication of conflicts? Now, Sharon, you name it, what the challenges that, what we see in the world today, including the change of leadership, the increase of religious intolerance, or sometimes, I would say economic, intolerance, though there is this multiplication and an expansion of the new technologies of information, which makes it easier for the world to be more connected today. We do have a lot more challenges that actually in 2025, it will be rightful to say that, as human beings, as Africans especially, who are very hopeful that the world, we should live in peace because of the philosophy that, we want to share in the world, we are also very realistic in saying that we will see a lot more of move toward, peace talks, peace negotiations, and it will be by the end of 2025, the time for us to assess what we have been able to do at the global level. There are so many of those conflicts with different reasons, different patterns, different trends, that coming to terms with them with some clear resolutions will definitely imply some very targeted and at the same time culturally relevant strategies, to quell and extinguish, those fires wherever they are burning now. But I believe that 2025 is going to be a challenging world, especially with the arrival of new leaders who are completely, either to the far left or to the far right, very radical in their thinking. But let's see what will happen.
Indeed, and like you rightly said, Dr. Reddy, Africa has mostly been tagged with, war on the African continent, but then we're seeing conflicts plaguing other parts of the world, and if not, carefully handled, this could escalate into a regional crisis, or better still, even into a third world war, which is what the world is not waiting, or better still praying for. Now, moving forward with your co-panelists, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to your co-panelist regarding his point of view around global conflicts. Now, as a Pan-Africanist, we are well aware that sometimes it's often said that some of these conflicts, be it in different parts of the world, are being, manipulated or being fueled by external parties. Now, what role does global power dynamics play in perpetrating this conflicts which we're seeing at the global stage, and how can these be dismantled so global peace can actually reign?
We're looking at the conflict, all right, in the geopolitical stability of the world, especially as you try to see different nations that are competing, for landmass or competing for economic resources. You have conflicts brewing everywhere. Either it be we are bringing in the front of religious, people who are just trying to be able to hold on to a particular religious philosophy, especially in places of the Middle East. And it's not just about land, or for that matter, it's actually religious in nature. Or you're looking, in between the war between Ukraine and Russia, which basically has to do with fundamentally with land, and there is all kinds of security issues which Russia itself has raised. We have obviously a platter of different issues, a buffet of them. It's more of a cocktail of different issues that different nations are raising, especially when it comes to the difficulties that they're facing as they make these, quite difficult decisions to go to war. On the continent of Africa, our situation is a little bit quite different. We have always been separated on the African continent across ethnic lines. And the reason for that is because either it's been promoted primarily from the outside, or obviously pre-colonial areas. We always had issues on the continent of Africa, just like every other part of the world, but that in itself never resulted in the amount of bloodshed that we see happening today. And what makes this post-colonial era very, very sad is the reason. It's because we have a lot of foreign, entities that are meddling within the continent of Africa. And the idea is to make sure that you divide so that you can conquer. And if you're able to put people lockerhead, and then they will basically not pay attention to what is absolutely needful. If you look at a place like the DRC, the constant fighting in the DRC, the constant fighting in the Central African Republic, in Central African Republic. All of that has resulted in mass looting of their natural resources. And as we speak, there are private jets leaving places like Central African Republic. There are private jets landing in places like Goma, looting natural resources out of that country. And because of the total instability that the country is going through with 127 different militia groups, there's absolutely nothing that anybody can do. So most of the conflicts that we are facing has to be as a result of foreign interference on the continent of Africa. I think that the question becomes, what do we do? How do we address the issues that we are facing? How can we be able to to mitigate? How can we be able to bring an end? How can we find ways in which we can be able to stop, these ongoing conflicts that we keep having? The first thing is this: most of whatever we are having right now, either in the places like Cameroon, or somewhat it's still brewing up in places like South Sudan, has nothing to do with the fact that we are Africans. It has everything to do with the fact that we have aligned ourselves with foreign ideologies, and we have been separated and basically meant to carry on foreign philosophical ideas, either be within the linguistic, arena, like being Francophone or Anglophone, in which it is that it has nothing to do with who we are as Africans. I think that we have to find ways in which we begin to communicate on the African continent again without the lenses of the West, neither without the lenses of the East. There has to be in-depth communication, conversations between us. We have to be able to adjust who we are as a people, knowing mindfully well that there is nobody, that absolutely no one is coming to help us. We have to help ourselves, and it will be, counterproductive for us to sit on the table and be able to invite any Caucasian to come and sit on the table and to talk about peace, or to mediate, or talk about the terms of our own liberation. And the reason is because we cannot be able to invite the people who have been instrumental in, in colonization, who have been instrumental in slavery, to come and sit at the same table and then have negotiations with them on how we need to be delivered. That in itself is quite demeaning. And that's what happens whenever we leave the continent of Africa and we go anywhere else. Either we are talking politics or we are talking on economic terms. It doesn't matter. The reality is we have what it takes to be able to handle these issues on the continent of Africa. most conflicts, that we have that is happening on the continent of Africa will be, fight over resources. And most often at times, it's always about people clinging to power and never letting, never wanting to go, obviously being blessed, by the powers that be that still stands in the West. We have to be able to get Africans to start thinking African and get Africans to start thinking about other Africans. And if we can bring that into, if we can bring that together, then things will be better. If you look on the continent of Africa, we don't really have any kind of conflicts happening between countries. There are always internal strife, there are always civil wars, and that's where we stand. And I think that we need to do a better job on the continent of Africa adjusting that.
Exactly, and much work has to be done, and that will start with, having to share or push forth the Ubuntu ideology. Like it's often said on the African continent, Dr. Eddie, it's said that a divided house cannot stand, and we live mostly by that ideology of our forefathers, those that brought forth Pan-Africanism, that united we stand, divided we fall. With this ideology of unity on the African continent, we still have, a couple of conflicts that are happening in Sudan due to political disagreement. We've seen what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've seen the political tensions in Mozambique and other parts of the African continent. We equally saw what happened in Libya. Your co-panelist shares the opinion that this could be as a result of some sort of external interference. But in your own capacity, do you share the opinion that this is just an idea, this idea of global unity is achievable in a world where we do have different backgrounds, be it at the cultural level, economic, religious, or better still, political differences?
It is absolutely possible, and we cannot avoid it. Lists, we all decide that we want to all become either black, Bantu people, under one ideology of the Ubuntu. You see, to answer that question, we maybe want to rely on our different, faith and religious backgrounds in here. Whether we are from the traditional African religion worshipping, or remembering what happened, in the Mahata philosophy, or we go to Weaver, the philosophy of the ancient, Dogon in Mali, God the creator, or even the Akan tradition has created people in multiple shades, in multiple forms. And there is no reason why today we may believe that, our cultural diversity, our ethnic diversity and religious diversity should be actually the reasons why the world is not at peace. It is because we cultivate, wherever we are, this philosophy of intolerance. You know, in 2008, a former president of the United States, Barack Obama, when he was on the campaign trail to win that historic election, visited, Germany. And he was in Berlin. He talked about, the Berlin Wall, which crumbled at the time. And in this famous speech that I remember, he said this, that, while the Berlin Wall fell, which led to the reunification of Germany to become the nation that, what we know today, at the same time, other walls, what went up. And those walls that went up are the most invisible, but yet the most dangerous walls. What are they? They're the walls of intolerance. They're the walls of exclusion, discrimination. They're the walls of racism. They're the walls of feminization. All of those are bad isms that, we may have in the world today. But those walls are not, we're building up because of our differences. What can we do? Do you want Dr. FONGOD and I tomorrow to declare that, no, hey, listen, or to bleach, as Frantz Fanon said, to become, white people, and then, we all, adopt a white ideology? What kind of insipid world it will be? I think that, even within our respective African countries, if you take, the Ivory Coast, for instance, Côte d'Ivoire, where I am from, the mosaic of ethnic groups that, what we have in there should not be a weakness, but it should actually be the strength that, what we build on. And there are plenty of examples that, what we see in the world. The United States is a melting pot. With, of course, all of these side and shades of racism, from one group against another that we see, regardless of all of the laws that have been passed and all of the effort to right all the wrongs that were done in the past since the time of slavery, the time of the civil rights movement up to now. There's still ongoing fight against injustice. So our cultural differences, Sharon, I do not believe at all that within the respective African countries on the African continent should be our number one problem. I do not believe that because in the world that we live we have and speak different languages which are not our fault, that we have the problems that we have. The problem that we have are purely, some of them were explained by Dr. FONGOD, and I agree with him. When we are looking, the battle for the critical minerals, as we talk about today, is going to be another defining line in the conflict that what we see in the world today. I think a few days ago when we were on the show, we also talked about some of the Kimberley, for instance, declaration that came up to regulate the origin of a diamond or gold in war, from war-torn countries, right? Because of the search for this wealth, this critical mineral today, or as we said, we're having a large deposit of oil become a curse instead of being a blessing. We need to change this narrative. We need to turn this narrative around. There is no reason why we have the Sahel burning today, a country such as Niger, with all these large deposits of a critical mineral that are necessary for our lives today all over the world, to be so poor, but also to be so engulfed in those terroristic attacks that we see every single day. There is no reason for Mali to be in there with all this large oil and then gold deposit that we have, and many other countries as well. So as Africans, people who believe again in the Ubuntu philosophy, as you said, I believe, and even the Mad philosophy, if we want to go back to ancient Egypt, I do not believe that our cultural differences, our ethnic differences, our racial differences should be the problem. It's the way we build on them. That's why we fight against racism all the time. That's why when even here in the United States you have a President Trump that is coming with all that he's trying to lay out, people are getting ready to fight any kind of injustice that exists in the world. It should not go with the color of the skin. It should not go with the color of the skin. It should not go with the color of the skin. It should, the gender that we are, it should simply go with the human being. And this is enshrined, and that's my last word, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. People have the right to live. People have the right to enjoy the resources of the environment where they are. People have the right to enjoy the cultural heritage. People have the right to enjoy the basics of life by a simple way that they are what? Human beings. And who are human beings? We are white. We are black. I don't know if we have a yellow. I don't know if we have a red. But if you want to wipe those colors, which sometimes also create problems, we are Europeans, we are Africans, we are Asians, and the others that Americans, and the others that you may name in there.
Exactly, Dr. Eddie. And of course, it's left for us to be able to bring that peace we intend to see in the world where we live in. Now, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to your co-panelists, and of course, I would like to sample or use a country like Rwanda on the African continent as an example. Rwanda went through the 1994 genocide, and today we see the country living peacefully after that, that tragedy that befell the East African country. We equally have other countries on the African continent and elsewhere, not forgetting, that have had, painful historical grievances to live with over the past years, but then they are trying to move on from those, some of those painful memories which they had in the past. Now, the question I'm asking you is, could these nations, yes, it's often said, like what's happening or what happened in Rwanda, could these nations actually move past some of these grievances, historical grievances to be precise, to be able to achieve or work towards that lasting peace which we are attaining for?
Absolutely. Look, I think Dr. Eddie said it just so brilliantly. The reality is that we have to start looking within the continent of Africa and looking within ourselves. And the complex nature that we have on the continent of Africa, especially when it comes to our traditions, when it comes to our values, you know, our ethnicity, the different languages that we speak, multiple languages in different African nations, okay? It's just a platter of them. It's good. And I think that if you were going to be able to appreciate any beautiful painting, even you're looking at a painting like Van Gogh or whoever you're looking at, what you see, it's the complex nature of the different pen brush and the different pen strokes or brush strokes. Once you take a look at that and you're able to step back, you can be able to appreciate this beauty. Imagine that all of those, you know, brush strokes were different ethnic groups, different languages, different cultures. And then in the end, you now have this beautiful mosaic. That's what brings beauty. It is in the diversity that we find unity. Without diversity, it is not possible for us to start talking about unity. And the different angles and the pushing and shoving, just so that we can be able to find or seamlessly integrate together, how be it difficult, that's what makes this picture so beautiful so far as the African is concerned. And I don't think that there has to be any place or any time in which we basically shun away from who we are as a people. The reality is, if you look at a country like Rwanda, without an external stimuli that created the pain that ensued in the genocide, 1994 genocide, there would never have been a mass genocide in Rwanda. It was always because of these external factors that basically precipitated, you know, the level of madness that took place. And also, just to be able to bring a little bit more clarity, we had forces on the ground that were able to intervene, and then none of those forces basically did nothing. I think the head of the UN peacekeeping force in itself actually committed suicide many years later, just because of the trauma of what he saw happening, all right, in Rwanda. Then I think Kofi Annan was head of the United Nations. You know, I mean, a black man, you would think that will basically mean anything. That literally meant nothing. The Clinton administration kept saying that nothing was happening in Rwanda. There was no genocide in Rwanda. And in 100 days, 1 million people died from the hands of machete. What that tells us as Africans is this: the notion that we have to sit on the continent and be waiting for some guide or someone to come from outside of the continent of Africa to help us, that in itself is a farce. We have to start finding ways in which we understand that nobody is coming. No one is coming. Many years ago in 2001, you know, out of my community college out in Maryland, I penned down this statement, which ended up on a political party somewhere. And I said that we are the ones we have been waiting for. And I was speaking this primarily because of what happened in Rwanda. I said, we are the ones. I was running for elections at my school. I said, we are the ones that we have been waiting for. Nobody else is coming. You see, the reality is that the best version of yourself is just you, and the best version of who you're looking for in the world is still you. You have the capacity and the skill sets to change the status quo. And the reality is, if you just show up, if you can show up, every single thing else will be all right. If you have the capacity to just answer the call, to show up and says, this is exactly what I'm going to do, I believe sincerely that you have the keys, you have everything that it takes to be able to change the status quo and bring us together. And because the only reason why I say that is because for there to be any meaningful change, you have to change. If there has to be any kind of change that will be meaningful in a country, everybody has to change. And if we start changing, then we affect other people and they too start changing. So the collective, the Ubuntu spirit, you are because I am. I cannot be a version of what it is that you do not want. I have to always be a version of what is it that is appealing to you and what is it that is fair and balanced. I have to be a version of somebody that is, that is acceptable across the board. So in my opinion, I think that if I have to change, in some ways, I will be affecting the life that you're living. I'll also be causing you to change. We can't keep talking about the issues of corruption when we are corrupt. We can't keep talking about the issues of peace when we promote violence. There has to be a way in which we talk about peace. There has to be a way in which we talk about non-violence, because we are living that lifestyle and we are propagating, preaching, that particular lifestyle. I don't think that Christianity or Islam or any other religion that we do have in itself is far more superior in context with that which we have on the African continent. I do believe that if there's anyone who believes anything, there are people on the African continent who never heard about Islam, who never heard about Christianity, who had a belief system on the African continent that was enshrined in natural law. And by virtue of that in itself, if we're going to talk about any kind of righteousness or anything for that matter that basically solidifies the afterlife, which is a common theme across many cultures around the world, that in itself still holds sway that they did that which was right. If there is any religion in it doesn't matter which religion that basically does not respect the dignity of human life, then that religion in itself is useless. If there is any religion that does not respect or dignify or the sanctity of the human life, then we shouldn't be talking about that. I think Dr. Eddie was mentioning, mud, which is basically one of the, ancient Egypt, which is Kemetic cultures. And if you look at that, there are these 42 laws of mud in itself, which mirror images the 10 commandments, and it is actually, there are 42 versus 10, which is, I think the 10 is more like a summary of the 42. So we've had those laws. I think that there's no culture on the African continent, to which is known to them that says you should go out and kill anyone or do anything evil to anyone. I think that we really need to be able to embrace who we are, embrace our diversity, embrace our cultures, our values, and our norms, and treat each other with respect. If we can do that, there is no conflict that we cannot heal from. There is no pain that we have gone through that we cannot heal from. As long as we keep thinking that slavery was the worst thing that happened to the continent of Africa, and without understanding that the greatness of the continent of Africa pre-slavery was better and bigger than anything else that slavery could have done to the African, the consciousness of the African will always be stunted, will always be limited with their ability to be able to envision a better future. There has to be a way in which we understand Africa's historical past with such just greatness, all right? How great it was in the past. And if we can harness from that, then we can be able to understand that if those boys did it in antiquity, we have every right to be able to do it today and push a better future, for our own children. I think that in itself will be able to heal any nation and heal any conflict on the continent of Africa.
Exactly. I'll be coming back to you to pick it up from there, Dr. Fongod, but then let me take your co-panelist. Dr. Reddy, having listened to Dr. Fongod and his stance pertaining to that question, let's look at now the global body, that is the United Nations. Earlier on, you were discussing in this discourse, you cited, the African Union on the African continent, and we have the general international body, the United Nations. Now, with these international institutions that are sometimes, created to oversee global peace and unity at the global level, irrespective of the region, could we pinpoint, using the year or snowballing the year 2024, could we pinpoint some of the gains and loopholes that some of these regional and international bodies have recorded all through this year? Inspired or despite the search for peace which we have been longing for, be it on the African continent or be it at the global stage. I remember some experts have been of the opinion that what's happening in Sudan seemed like a forgotten crisis, but Sudan is not the only country. There are other countries reeling from this conflict, be it here in Africa or elsewhere on the globe. So what if we're trying to, understand how effective have these bodies been in trying to, conceive this idea of peace at the global level?
Well, this question takes us back to an analysis or another criticism of the United Nations mechanism for peace, in the world. We all know that the UN was set up in the wake of World War II to make sure that the world does not experience such a conflict, in that of that magnitude. Though those conflicts were European wars per se, they became, world wars because of the colonial situation, which, of course, enable the European fighting powers to draw troops from all over the world, especially from the African continent. The United Nations Security Council is the main body when it comes to patrolling, if you want, controlling, surveilling, and making sure that conflicts does not arouse, emerge, and destroy this world peace that we're talking about. After so many years, the debate continues about the necessity to revamp the UN Security Council, which has sometimes, were proven to be very ineffective, or sometimes, have proven to be also successful. When we look at the history of the UN, the Security Council, there are instances when the two major powers, for instance, the Soviet Union at the time, which is today Russia, and the United States, were able to come into terms. We remember what happened, for instance, for the Suez Canal crisis, for instance, when they were able to ask the British troops to withdraw from their occupation, British troops and French troops to withdraw from the occupation of the Suez Canal. We have a lot of missile crises also that were able to be averted because of the understanding between the two, and many others. However, people who are very critical of the successes or the failures of the United Nations Security Council are very right. We take the Congo, for instance, as an example, where, as we said, since the 1960s, a few years or less than months after this country gained independence, shamble, it has been in shamble, all the crises have started with what we know. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated, whereas you have the United Nations peacekeeping forces with Ghanaian presence, African presence on the ground. It did not avert that. And there are many other. We just mentioned what happened in Rwanda. Today, with the coming back of President Trump, for instance, and then we are talking about, the P5, the most important nations, within this Security Council that hold the veto power. We have seen and we saw what is happening, in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. Regardless of the condemnation by the Western European power, this crisis is ongoing because no resolution from the United Nations and the Security Council can go through, because Russia itself is a P5 or has the veto power in there. And we know the mechanism. With all that, what being said, we wanted to see the role that, the new U.S. administration, right, will play at the United Nations, within the peace, the Security Council, for instance, to make sure that, certain conflicts can move towards, the end, because of how they will come up with some sort of agreement in there. As long as we continue to witness this huge disagreement, this geopolitical disagreement that, those which are, of course, the reflection of the interest that, each of those powers are pursuing, we will be very, very careful in navigating and talking about the return of peace or greater peace in the world in 2025. We are looking at what is happening in Syria today. For instance, Russia is talking about it is not a failure on their own. They are withdrawing, of course, all the military apparatuses in this country since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. And we are yet to analyze what will happen in Syria with the arrival of this new power. We saw what is happening in Libya. Even though the leadership in this country, the rival, faction have decided to come to a table of negotiation to make sure that the move toward a more peaceful Libya, which will be and have a greater implication for the rest of Africa and even for the Middle Eastern country. We see what is happening in the Middle East today. What will be, again, the firm resolution of the United Nations Security Council on making sure that, Israel and Palestine, with Hezbollah in Lebanon and all that comes to a certain ceasefire first, and then move toward a resolution. Maybe it's time also to bring back to the table the question of a two-states resolution, which was already decided, way back in the 1960s, but which has never been implemented. Palestine till today has only an observer status within the United Nations, not being recognized as a full state. Maybe it's time to bring that back in there again. And of course, we talk about what is going on in Somalia, but in other parts of the world, there are certain conflicts that, because of their longevity, they have been so protracted that we ended up forgetting about them. We hear from time to time what is happening in Yemen. Not long ago we heard that the United Nations will order some strikes against the Houthis rebels in Yemen, for instance, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. From time to time we hear what is happening in the eastern part, but this is a bigger crisis. When we don't hear about rebel attack, then we hear about a disease somewhere, or we hear about a ferry that have capsized. All that we are talking about death, and one is related to another. So to end on that question, Sharon, I believe that the United Nations, the Security Council, one, the African Union Peace and Security Council, two, and the other regional bodies will have a greater role to play, to up their game very definitely. And I'm looking at what is happening in the Sahel again with the ECOWAS. The decision that have been made so far with regard to how to deal with these three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, are not yielding the expected result that will also lead towards a peaceful Sahel area, which will be a peaceful West African era. Why? Because the more the Sahel is burning, the more people are being displaced, and then those people being displaced, where do they go? Either they remain within the countries that are burning, or unstable because of these insurgencies and terrorist attacks, or they move to neighboring countries, which becomes a burden again from the West Africa coastal countries. Same thing is happening in Nigeria. People move around regardless of whether they like it or not. So those bodies, with the United Nations Security Council being the top one, will have a major role to play. It comes in there. But again, one of the things that we need to look at is it time to bring back the debate about reshaping the United Nations Security Council? I think the time is ripe to do that one more time, and making sure that there is a diversity of a power in India, or maybe to take away, as some people have suggested, the veto power, for instance, and make the United Nations a truly democratic institution whose decision can be really binding for some, super power nation. You take a country such as China. China has been very quiet when it comes to those things because of China's engagement. Number one, in the South China Sea, the issue of Tibet, the issue of Taiwan. So China is very careful in manipulating or managing all of those conflicts in those areas without yelling too loud other conflicts in the world at the same time. You understand? But all of those things, were combined to, again, keep our world not stable.
And that is a call for action for the various international bodies to be able to, reform themselves so that it actually fits into present realities, the present challenges that are facing the globe, which they are called to protect. Now, Dr. FONGOD, earlier on said we're coming back to continue or pick up from where we had stopped regarding your response. And of course, we had seen what happened, in South Africa with the apartheid period, where the country was able to move past that history and actually became the South Africa we know of today. We equally saw the post-Cold War period in Europe. We equally saw others, and other countries have actually reeled from some of these challenges. Now, what can we learn from some of the, successful peace-building efforts? Why not let's cite countries even on the African continent, like what happened between Somalia and Ethiopia, where we are seeing countries putting in place initiatives to, overcome the respective challenges that are facing their different countries. With that said, what stance should the African continent take in the face of all these global conflicts, given that Africa on its own already has its own, numerous issues to deal with?
I believe that we have to look. I think if you're looking at a country like South Africa, you just mentioned South Africa. If you're looking at a country like South Africa, there has to be that talk about South Africa actually emerging out of the apartheid era and actually electing someone like Nelson Mandela to power. And I think that ever since power shifted and South Africa became a little bit more united. But the reality is that if you're looking at any kind of unity that exists in South Africa, you still discover that the country has not experienced any kind of an inclusive development. And the reason for that is because the investments that were necessary, especially to be able to validate the country coming out of the apartheid area, those gains were never made. There had to have been, investments made in agriculture. There had to have been investments made, especially in the black neighborhoods, investments made in education. And unfortunately, those investments were not made. And, we're looking at more than 25 years later, nothing, absolutely, it's still all right so far as South Africa is concerned. I mean, appetite is gone, but there is still economic appetite, especially when you look at the black population. And this has resulted in black neighborhoods and townships being one of the worst places to live, so far as South Africa is concerned, because you have a lot of young people who are uneducated, young people who are jobless, who basically do not have a means of livelihood and who resort to nothing else but crimes. Drug is rampant, and that is the kind of stuff that we have so far as the country is concerned. I think that there has to be some kind of an integration. By the time we start talking about being able to bring peace and solve some of the conflicts that we have, investments needs to be made in both quarters. Whoever, and whichever parties need those investments so that we can bring people up to speed. I don't think that you can be able to start talking about people who have been in conflict, who spend most of their time fighting for freedom. And when you basically say yes, freedom, and then investments are not made so that people can either can throw their arms and then pick up shovels and start walking, or they can be able to throw, their guns and then pick up books and start reading and finding ways in which they can be able to change the model and basically be integrated in the economic landscape. With that, which what we'll be having, what we'll be having is exactly the same thing that we are having today, where we have countries that have these different factions. And these different factions within the countries, every so often will say, we have been marginalized, we are not experiencing what we should experience, and then the conflicts actually brew up. Secondly, do I think that Africa has a lot to learn so far as the world is concerned? Obviously. And I think that there's a lot that Africa can actually gain when you look at what happened in Europe post the period of, during the Marshall Plan period. I think that there's a lot that Africa can gain from, even though that in itself became one of the worst nightmares for the African. But there's a lot that we can learn from experiences like that coming out of a great war and then finding ways to build. I think that we can be able to tap from them, certain lessons. And what are those lessons? Number one, there were great investments that were made by countries into those particular areas, like the United States made great investments into Europe and into building countries like Germany. we have to be able to find ways in which we do same on the African continent. I think that time has come for us to start having some kind of a conversation, about reparation. I don't know exactly how we do that, and I don't think that monetary reparation actually makes sense. And that's one of the reasons why I myself it's against any kind of reparation for African Americans in the United States. And the reason is because if you look at the way people spend money, especially the African American crowd, the way they spend money, if they were going to spend money that way, all right, without making any kind of investments to the future, because the people, this is actually a generational thing. It has nothing to do with individuals living in this particular time to make decisions for the future or to make decisions for the people who lived in the past. And I think that the issues of reparation must come with structural development. It must come with infrastructural development. We have to be able to make sure that if there was going to be any way in which you start talking about anything that's to do with reparations, let it be on roads, let it be on seaports, let it be on airports, let it be on railway, tracks. Let us find ways in which we can be able to build something that is enshrined for the people, of the continent going forward. And then let it be that, especially, there's no reason why we should still be sitting here and talking about any country on the African continent owing someone. I think that we also have to, give a shout out to Burkina Faso for what they did, especially when it came to, them being able to pay back, their national debt. That in itself is remarkable. I think that we have to give a shout out to them. But for me, I'm thinking that we really must be able to find ways in which we make the necessary investments in the quarters that we need to do the investments in, without which every other thing else is going to just be still. We cannot be talking about any kind of development, and if that development does not have the necessary investments in the infrastructures that we need to invest in, especially when it concerns the life of the young people. Because those are the guys tomorrow who will pick up arms. Those are the guys who will be on the street protesting because they have probably been to school, they have not been to school, and yet there's no job. We must make sure that we do the right investments for young people. That in itself will bring us a little bit more closer and close the gaps for conflict.
Exactly. Dr. Eddie, do you believe, or do you share the same opinion as your co-panelists in the wake of Africa's stance with regards to global conflicts? And of course, do you equally believe that the voices of those who have been underrepresented, like women, young people, like your co-panelist stated, do have a very key role to play in shaping the future of peace building?
Very definitely, yes. If we look again, at the proportion of people who qualify as a young in the world today, if many countries and world powers are today being more and more interested in Africa, in addition to the interest for the critical minerals, it is also the main power that Africa represents and will represent, in the near future. When we talk about, the number of people who will be the working force, for instance, the majority of them, will be in Africa. It calls, right, for a clear representation of these people in the effort to bring peace, in the effort to bring equality, and to take their opinion into consideration. Another thing that you mentioned, which is very critical, is the role that women will be playing. Today, Rwanda is one of the very few countries where you have an equal representation of men and women in a political decision making bodies, which is a resolution that the African Union passed, calling on African nations to make sure that to reach the 2060 goal, for instance, one of them will be to raise gender equality. But up to today, how many countries in Africa today have the member of parliament, for instance, or the National Assembly, where you have an equal representation or a fairer representation of men and women and young people? We continue to have a continent which has the largest number of young people, but the largest number of people who are not young that are leading them. So this is the economy, this contracts is in there, and Sharon, very definitely, I believe that raising the voice of women and young people in decision-making bodies will be also very critical as we move toward the resolution of the conflict and the crisis that we see. When you see what is happening in the Sahel countries, if we want to take the example of this example, or you take the example of what happened in Ghana very recently with the re-election of President John Mahama, the Afrobarometer clearly indicates that for these young people, the new leadership incarnates or should incarnate, what their desire for more jobs, for their desire for a more stable economy, their desire to live in a country where you have a lot more opportunities. Let us not forget that the lack of opportunities as such can also be one of the dimensions of the global crisis or the conflict that what we are talking about in and here. If it takes a people, as somebody said in Côte d'Ivoire in the years ago, a former minister of youth, if it is in the mind of a people that ideas of war, of crisis, of conflict, of fighting emerge, it is in the minds of people that what we need to also plant the seeds of a peaceful resolution of conflict for them to emerge. Therefore, there is a need to change people, and these people who are there, they are young people, they are women as well. In terms of where the African continent is standing today, Sharon, we are living in this world where people, of course, are battling the idea of a cosmopolitanism. I want to come back onto that, or remaining provincial or parochial. For us Africans, again, it is clear. We have a mosaic of cultures which represents, what the richness of the continent, not just the critical minerals that the continent has, not just, what the large deposit of oil or natural gas that we have, but it is the people that we have. Personally, for instance, anytime I travel to an African country, like last year we were in Kenya, when some of my friends were interested in doing some safari, after all of the activities were therefore were completed, I told them that I did not come to see animals, though I love them. I don't want them to be extinguished, but I came to see people. I want to meet people. I want to be on the street with the cab driver, with the Uber driver. That's where you learn the culture, and that's where you relate one-on-one. But I don't want to go to a safari to the forest and see lion chasing gazelle to eat them. That's not what I want. You understand? I'm saying that to joke, but to say that this is the way for us, right, to break this cultural misunderstanding that we have and build more on what can bring us together regardless of our differences, in terms of ethnicity, differences in terms of culture, differences in terms of gender as well, men and women in here, I want to say. So, yes, I share largely the opinion of my co-panelists on that. But one thing that, what I want to also mention very quickly, which is not a contradiction but an addition, is clear that I agree. The cultural differences may not necessarily be the factor. Even though in the Western political and social and political thought, anytime we are looking at crisis in Africa, for instance, automatically we see the ethnic differences or the religious differences. Sometimes we brush them aside completely, whereas we look at a country such as Somalia. How many cultures are in there? One. How many languages? One. Cultures? One. Languages? One. But yet this country is also in this area. How do we explain that? It means that, there are other factors that are playing into that. Right? So this is the only example I want to bring in here, again, to demonstrate that I do agree with my co-panelists. I agree that women and young people should, opportunities should be created more for them to be at the table. And it can be not just in national assemblies, in local governments, but even within the trade unions, even within the civil society organizations, even within the of course, when we say student union, they're already in there, but there are different bodies where we should have this mentality that, men and the younger people should be fairly represented. And I believe this will be building blocks that will lead toward a greater emancipation of those young people and women in clear political decision-making bodies.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Eddie Eric, our expert for today. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa, where we're discussing global conflicts and looking at, how peace and unity can prevail amidst the plethora of challenges facing the global stage at this point. Now, to proceed with today's conversation, Dr. FONGOD, having listened to your co-panelists on that, you're an economist, and from that point of view, or from that standpoint, do you believe that economic sanctions, in one way or the other, either, or not just economic sanctions, even military interventions like we've seen in some places on the African continent, most especially in West and some parts of Central Africa, could these be hindering or fostering, these peace efforts which we are seeing on the African continent and at the global stage?
Right, absolutely. And the reason for that is because when you start thinking about some of the issues we face, especially knowing mindful that on the continent of Africa, we have a lot of young people who are not working, a lot of young people who have been through our academic institutions and they are out and they are still looking for jobs. Most of our countries, the government or the public sector rather, actually has more people than the private sector. And so obviously the public sector is really not a money-making system, all right? It's more runs like an NGO. What that means is they can only hire so many people. It does not matter how many jobs you create in the public sector. You can have 10,000 people working in one office in some ministry. It still doesn't mean anything. You can hire them, but the question is, how do you pay them? And this is where, we have most of our issues. If you look in most West African countries, you realize that the government is never on time paying anybody. And the reason is because they hire all these people and they do not have the money to be able to pay them. And secondly, you need to also understand, how does the government makes their money? That comes in through taxation. So they will tax you, they'll create this job and then tax the living daylight out of you, and everybody else, just to basically have this phantom mindset that they are paying people. I think that is the same thing that Russia did many years ago, and which was this idea about having this in the communist system, having people go to work, which basically meant nothing, because in the communist system you're really not doing any kind of work. And so there's this funny line where it says in their history, it says workers will say they pretend to pay us, and so we pretend to work. And that's the reality that we face so far as the African continent is concerned. We have to be able to make sure that we do major investments, especially in the private sector. The private sector needs to thrive. That means innovation. We have to get young people involved in technology. We have to get young people involved in agriculture. We have to get young people involved in manufacturing. We have to find ways in which we bring additional value to our raw materials without just shipping them outside of the continent of Africa, but bringing some kind of value to them, converting them to finished or semi-finished goods before we export them out of the continent of Africa. Why should we sell cocoa beans to any part of this world? Why don't we basically send cocoa paste or cocoa powder? We have to at least begin the manufacturing process on the continent of Africa before shipping that outside, which means we will be having a lot of young people participating, in the marketplace and participating in the economy as well. That's what we need to do. There has to be a lot of investments made in in technology. For example, we have a lot of young people who actually have the skill sets to do a lot of stuff in the tech space, but they are not connected. And if you have a particular country where the internet penetration is very low, what you realize eventually is you will have very few people participating, in the global economy from that perspective. But as long as the internet penetration is high, you have people who can be able to participate, either selling products online or either selling or creating contents, whatever they do and wherever they do it, they can be able to have success if only they have access to the internet. And we have to be able to push for greater penetration on internet access and also greater penetration for power. I think that power is everything. if we do not push for power on the continent of Africa, even if we do not have terrestrial lines that can be able to get into some communities because of just how far they are from the main grid, we can be able to set up, smaller systems to take care of communities, either using solar energy, wind, or even hydroelectricity dams, or that can just be small enough to take care of particular communities. The Germans used to do this in many areas of Africa many years ago. I don't see why we cannot be able to get that particular model. Everybody should not be on the main grid, but we can basically split up the grid into smaller communities and be able to power those smaller communities and get people working and get people connected and get people, active so far as tech is concerned. And that also will mean that a lot of young people will pick up new skills, because then the e-learning platforms will now become available to them. They will be able to receive lectures from people who are studying in some of the best universities in the world, but not so in some village on the African continent. That in itself will be great if we're able to take care of energy, if we're able to take care of internet connectivity, and I think that will be the building block for basically building a more robust, environment on the African continent, getting a lot of young people, to work. Without which, then the story will be what it has always been. If we do not get young people, if we do not invest in young people, then we are not investing in the future. I don't care what we do.
I'd like to stay with you, Dr. FONGOD, but this time around, since you're a tech expert, I would like to capitalize on that. You mentioned that imposing, or better still, using technology and innovations would be paramount in, investing in the youth in a bid to curb some of those conflicts plaguing the global world at this point in time. But then, could these different innovations go a long way in bridging the gap which we are seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to be able to invest in tech. If you're not investing in technology, I don't know exactly what else you're investing in. For example, we have a whole new entire tech revolution that is taking place right now in the space of AI with artificial intelligence. What that means is this, that you have a lot of more millionaires that are being created in this space using these applications than any other tech revolution that has occurred in human history. That is how powerful this is. And the reality is the potential, we are still scratching the surface so far as the AI revolution is concerned. We have not even finished yet with the blockchain technology, and we are just basically enjoying, or we have not even fully understood the more applications that are possible within the blockchain space. We're just enjoying that, but yet the AI is something absolutely phenomenal. All you need to do is to be able to understand coding, which is basically maybe a program like Python. It is the same program that artificial intelligence AI use when it writes its own program. It's called Python. If you understand this, and which is basically not that difficult, if you're able to understand this, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you will have the capacity to be able to pick up a job and work for somebody, maybe a major corporation, irrespective of wherever you are in the world. This skill sets is extremely useful and it is needed. Once we get a lot of young people to participate and understand and learn and study this skill set, that will be more valuable to the entire economy. And I think that nations on the continent of Africa should be able to create tech centers where young people are taught programming, young people are taught how to be able to code. You see, we do not have a lot of information out there in the cyberspace. We don't have a lot of information out there on the internet that pertains to exactly what we want and how we want it. And so if you look at artificial intelligence model, all that they're doing is learning from previously recorded information. So they're learning, they're going through a lot of materials to study patterns and then to understand exactly how we think and to understand a people. And obviously, most of the materials that they are going through pertaining to the African is actually from the West. It is written with a Eurocentric mindset, all right? And then with that Eurocentric mindset, it's not written with the Pan-African mindset. So in other words, Europeans are telling African stories, and AI that is learning whatever it is that it can find is learning European information on Africa. It's not learning African information from Africa with an Afrocentric mindset by Africans. It's learning whatever garbage has been written by the West concerning Africa. And so we have to be able to do something and do it quick, where we tell our story by ourselves. If we do not do that, I'm telling you the honest truth, we will not enjoy the future, and we will not like what the future holds, because these systems will become increasingly intelligent, and eventually we'll start looking for AI models that are more Afrocentric in nature. Meanwhile, that's not supposed to be the case, because AI models that has to do with the West does not care. It's getting information that the West has placed in the system, is learning information about the West. We have to be able to build our own, which means we have to be able to get into the areas of creating data centers on the continent of Africa, which is absolutely needed. Without robust data centers, top tier 1 data centers, level 3 data centers on the continent of Africa, we will not be in any position to say anything to anybody. And unfortunately, without us also having data centers, that simply means we are leaving a lot of money on the table from companies like Netflix, from companies like Facebook, companies like Amazon. We are leaving a lot of money as nations by way of taxes on the table, because we can't regulate anything. And there are so many companies on the African continent that are using products from Microsoft. And yet Microsoft is not paying a dime to any of the countries to which it is that Microsoft sells the product. And the reason for that is because there's no way for Microsoft to authenticate anything, neither do we on the African continents even know what the hell is going on. We are in the dark, completely in the dark, and we need to be able to bring people who understand fully what is going on, so that we can be able to set up the systems that is necessary, and then we can be able to start making money, and also getting some of these corporations to bring investments, to areas that we need them to invest in. But that begins with us building data centers and getting tech centers set up.
Exactly. And if there's one thing I have learned from this conversation, as well as our audience, is that peace and unity is actually attainable, and of course action is now. To conclude today's conversation with you, Dr. Eddie Eric, I believe we have underlined a couple of issues that could be at the origin of global conflicts at the global stage, citing, failure of leadership, as well as the reflection of deeper systematic flaws that do exist in the system, which we might have no idea about. But in a bit to wrap up this conversation, amidst all all these reasons we've cited so far, what is the way forward out of all this conflict? How can the way chart for peace and unity? Amidst this, what about we underlining the role of every citizen, as well as the role of every community in ensuring that this peace actually prevails at the global stage?
I'm going to lean on what I tell my students in my human rights class, for instance, that human rights begins at home. The education, the respect of the sanctity of life, and the respect of what it is that human beings are entitled to by the simple way of them being human beings, whether they're black, whether, again, they're from Africa, from Europe, from America, from Oceania, or from Antarctica, wherever they are from the world. It starts at home. Number one. And number two, there are basic things, of course, that needs to be taught. For instance, we are all human beings, and there are basic things that we need to live. There's no human beings that survive without water, clean water. There's no human being that survive without, air, clean air. There is no human being that survive, without a food, clean food, and proper food. There's no human being that survive today without, a medicine, without healthcare. There is nobody that can survive without the internet today. These are basic things that, we should not be depriving, people from. We should not be depriving or do our best, to deprive people from electricity, for instance. I'm talking about power in here. So These are the things that, can be taught. And I believe that the same way we are teaching those things, the same way we can also teach about the peaceful resolution of conflict. I'm going to call on that. For instance, that we don't have to wait until we reach graduate studies, for instance, right, to enforce the teaching of not just human rights, but also of conflict resolutions, for instance. So I believe, in those things. Dr. FONGOD, earlier talked about, what the importance of technology today. I agree 100% with him on that. Why? Because this internet revolution today can also be at the same time a tool being used by autocratic regimes to suppress, freedom and liberty, or even being used by insurgent groups or by military powers to expand, their presence, of course, expand conflicts, but at the same time, it can also be used towards extinguishing or the resolution of those conflicts. If we truly want to live in a globally connected world today, not everybody has the right has the ability to travel from one place to another, but we can all travel very fast with the power of the internet, which is probably one of the greatest revolution or invention of our world today. All of those things, I believe can be used to good practice toward the resolution of this conflict that we are talking about in the world today. Sharon, to land, I truly believe that 2025 is going to be a very interesting year, and we are going to live and experience interesting times with, again, the arrival into power of people with different mindsets, especially what is happening in the United States and the role that this country is going to play within within NATO, the role that is going to play again, within the United Nations and the Security Council. But I'm calling, right, again, especially African leaders, to look at what President Thabo Mbeki did when he was in power. And I believe he continues to do that with his institute that every year organizing, it is a think tank that organizes every year reflection on how to bring about, peace, peace on the African continent. Though I believe in universalism, I believe in cosmopolitanism, I continue to believe strongly that cultural values matter and should matter in the resolution of certain conflicts. The copy and paste or one solution fits all today has proven irrelevant, weak, unnecessary, and wrong all across border. You cannot resolve a conflict by taking, some solutions from the country A, and you say you are applying to country B without adjusting, without knowing the reality on the ground. It is impossible. There are within African countries so many cultures. Some of them have those kind of cultural alliances that they have had since for ages and ages and ages. A very conscientious person, leader, or even whatever you call it, in terms of conflicts, to resolve those conflicts, people will have to take all that into consideration. And to end, again, I'm going to reassert what you said earlier, Sharon, which I agree, is that, men, women especially, and young people suffer the most from conflicts all over the world, especially in Africa. There is no way the resolution of those conflicts cannot take them into consideration. And I want to land on that one. Thank you again for having us.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Eddie Eric. And just to note, the experts of today was Dr. Stanley FONGOD, a Pan-Africanist economist and fintech expert, and of course, Dr. Eddie Eric, a global politics consultant and executive secretary of Committee of Actions for Côte d'Ivoire. Those were our guests for today. Thank you immensely, sirs, for taking our time to be with me on this edition of Talking Point.
Thank you. All right, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and to stay in company of our numerous programs.